Hey, shining stars. I'm so excited that we're back together again this year for British literature and composition, and I cannot wait to get you into class and to tell you all the fun things that we have planned this year. But we're beginning with Beowulf, and you're going to have to read this before you even come to the first class. So I decided to make a few videos to hopefully pump you up for what's to come and give you some things to be looking for when you're reading, because I think that will make it all the more interesting, and hopefully you'll fall in love with this epic poem just like I have. So Beowulf is really cool. It is like the oldest written English poem ever in the world that we still have a manuscript for. The setting is a little bit questionable. It was found in the early 11th century. However, we think that the poem itself dates way back to the 700s or even earlier. The setting of Beowulf, confirmed by some of the names in Beowulf and the places, and some of the things are historical and others are just completely embellished. But we think that the setting of the story was actually early 6th century, so like the 500s. But it started as just like a tale to tell around the campfire, and the more people who got their hands on it, the more daring Beowulf became, the bigger the monsters were. It just, it's like a fish story situation. So one of the things that the Vikings were not really known for was writing. I guess they're just really busy with all of that pillaging and conquering and all of that, even though I do think the Vikings are pretty cool. More on that later. But we think that this was written down and maybe in the 700s, 800s, probably by a monk. And I say that because the people of Beowulf's time, the Vikings, the Scandinavians, the Danes, the Geats, all of these people, they were really polytheistic, meaning they did not know the one true God. They did not honor him and worship him. They worshiped other gods like Thor and all these other people, okay? So Beowulf has a lot of Christian overtones in it, though, and explicit like connections to Genesis and different parts of the Old Testament especially, which makes me think that probably a scribe, a monk, sat and wrote this down after hearing it, probably maybe before the Norman invasion, maybe after, we're not really sure, but try to insert some things into Beowulf, like God is over fate. Fate is not the end of your destiny, right? There's a God who loves you, who is more powerful than this idea of fate. Or he tried to link evil characters like the monster Grendel to the murder of Abel by Cain, and saying that, this is where sin gets you, right? So you see these little interjections all throughout Beowulf. And so just keep your eyes open for that. You might want to note it in your book. Side note, I know a lot of you are checking books out from the library, or maybe you're using books on the public domain, like online, you're using a PDF format, or maybe you're just listening to the Audible version. And of course, you do what works for you. I'm a visual person. I really like to have that book in my hand because I'm making so many notes in it. And I know some of you might think, man, that's like ruining a book, but I don't see it that way. So do whatever you need to do. But if you're going on to like a college situation after high school, you might be taking another British Lit class. You're probably going to read this book again. I'm just saying, if you already have a book and you already have all your notes in it, it's going to help you so much in the long run. So just food for thought on that. But anyway, Beowulf, the setting. One of the things that I think is really important to me, it might not be as important to you, but I love that I was doing some research on Vikings, and I've linked a video of a Viking ship that they have actually excavated. They've dug up, because the Vikings used to bury There are noblemen, there are mighty warriors in ships and fill them full of treasure. And they literally buried them in the ground, which I can't even imagine. They probably do not have the same soil we have here in Central Texas with all the rock. But anyway, they have, there's tons that they haven't excavated, but there is a video that I've linked on Google Classroom of a really great example of a ship that was really intact that's now in a museum in Norway. But it's really short, and I think it'd be cool if you watched it just to see what they look like and what that was like, because our story Beowulf opens with a funeral and closes with a funeral in a Viking ship. So anyway, I thought that would be a really great context for you. But the other thing that's really cool to me is that in all of my research, I have found that there are actually a lot of women Viking warriors. Rah! You know, I just think, man, in movies and stories, and probably when these things were written, there was just definitely a more patriarchal, valuing of men as leaders and men as heroes. And you just don't really hear about women like that a lot. But the Vikings really were not partial. They had women thanes and women queens and women Viking warriors who were buried also in ships with hordes of treasures and weapons and sent out to sea and all of those things. So anyway, girls, don't think this is a book just for the guys. This is definitely, I want you to know that you could put yourself in this story too. The other thing that I think that you need to know about Beowulf is the structure of it. It was written as a poem. And so the cool thing about this, though, is that in the translation that we're reading by Seamus Heaney, he does such a great job of bringing it into like modern language without completely cutting out the structure of the way the poem was written originally. This poem was heavily alliterative. If you don't remember what that word means, it means that they use a lot of the same starting sounds on lines to help move the story along. For example, on line 24, we hear, and I love this line anyway, the storyteller is saying, behavior that's admired is the path to power among people everywhere. And you just get that path to power to people. It's like it's perfectly written for oral reading and to make it interesting. Anyway, I think that that's pretty cool. And there's so many examples of that. I mean, literally on every single page of this entire poem. So can you imagine Seamus Heaney had a job to do because he had to translate the old English text into modern English, and the words aren't like an even, this word now means this word kind of thing. So he did a great job, though, of keeping the same sounds type going. Another thing that is really cool in this poem is this thing called kennings. This is a kenning poem. And I don't know if you have read a kenning poem before. There's actually, there's other examples of kenning poems, but this is definitely the most famous. So, okay, what is a kenning? Kenning. It's not a Barbie thing. Okay, kenning is when they take two words to replace a noun in a metaphorical sense. So for example, you get, instead of like a spear, you might have a death stick, right? That's just a silly example. The monster Grendel is a shadow stalker, or the king is gracious, so they call him a ring giver, okay? So in my text, I have highlighted in blue pencil because highlighters tend to bleed through, but I have taken like a map color and I've highlighted every cool example of a kenning that I have found. I just think what a great way to really enhance your writing when we do our own composition, to use kennings to really amp up the imagery of what you're writing about. You can take some boring nouns and replace them with two-word metaphors and really just speak more into what you're writing and paint a better picture for your reader without having to go to the thesaurus and just constantly come up with a new word, right? Sometimes you can do these two-word descriptions and they just make all the difference in the world. So anyway, I encourage you to either keep a list if you can't write in your book, or to just mark them straight into your book. Like, one of the things that you'll see early on is, instead of using the word ocean or the sea, they call it the whale's road, which I just think is so beautiful. Also, speaking of beautiful, the imagery, even when kennings are not in use, is just it's definitely admirable in this book. And so one of the things, like on line 696, one of my favorite lines so far is, but the Lord was weaving a victory on his war loom for the weather Geats. And I just think that's so cool, just this picture of God weaving a victory and this beautiful tapestry of their lives. Another thing that I think is noteworthy is on about line 710 all the way through 735 or 36 or so, you get this long picture of Grendel, the first monster that Beowulf has to fight, and his journey to Herod, the mead hall where all the Danes are gathered. It's the place where their king's throne is. It's the place where they gather, they feast, they even sleep there. And this monster Grendel is coming and attacking them in the night, and he's been doing it, spoiler alert, they say, for 12 winters. So I'm guessing that means 12 years. This has been a long going battle for the Danes. And Beowulf, who is from probably southern Sweden, from the land of the Geats, Geatland, he comes and as a favor really to Hrothgar, the king of the Danes, because Hrothgar had helped his father in the past. And so Beowulf, wanting to increase the glory of his own king whom he served, and to honor this bond between Hrothgar and his father, comes and says, I will deliver you from this monster. But anyway, I digress. About line 710, you get this beautiful, or not really beautiful, it's honestly terrifying, this picture of Grendel, on the warpath toward Herod, and just these beautiful verbs. He's greedily loping, he's roaming forth, he's hunting for prey, scouting the grounds, he's journeying, his rage is boiling over, he enters the mouth of the building, he's pacing, and it says that fire is flaring from his eyes, right? That his glee was demonic. Just that he wanted to devour them, to rip life from limb. And I think that you are going to really appreciate that, because it's just these pictures of that Seamus Heaney translates so beautifully. They just make it come alive in my mind. I do want to caution you, don't get discouraged if there are names like Hrothgar and Herod and so many of these Viking names that you don't know how to pronounce. Just make up a pronunciation and keep going. Don't get discouraged. There are a lot of vocabulary words that Seamus Heaney decides to keep. They're old words that we really don't use anymore, because either there wasn't a better translation for the word, or he just really liked the sound of it and he wanted to preserve that word. Most all of them, though, you can totally understand based on the context clues of the sentence. Or I should say the line of poetry. He does a really good job of supporting those old text words with new context so that you feel like it's a word that you have seen and known your whole life. So don't get hung up on that. You can do this. Basically, I would group this entire story into 3 parts. Beowulf is fighting Grendel, the monster. Then he has to fight Grendel's mama, because even monsters have moms. And then whenever he is done with that, 50 years pass. Beowulf becomes his own king of the Geats, and then a dragon invades, and he has to fight this dragon as an old man. So it's a really interesting story. It's full of a lot of action. It's loaded with I think you're going to learn and see a lot about what life was like back in the 6th century. especially for wealthy people. I think this is definitely a story that is told more from the perspective of wealthy people and warriors and thanes, which are like political landowners that serve the king. You don't really get the perspective of like the working class, of the poorer people during this time. It's more about the people in power, but nevertheless, it's really interesting, and I really look forward to hearing what you have to say about this. I'll try to make another video for next week and tell you some of my favorite parts of your reading then. So good luck. Don't hesitate to reach out if you have any questions. I have combed over this text so many times, and every time I love it more and more and more. So if you have a question, it just gives me the opportunity to go back into my book and to tell you all the things I love about it. So anyway, good luck. I'm praying for you, and this is going to be great. See you later.